The rain hammered against the tin roof of the abandoned warehouse as Sarah Chen pressed her back against the cold concrete wall. Her breathing was controlled, measured, despite the chaos that had erupted just minutes before. 3 men lay unconscious on the floor around her, their weapons scattered like fallen leaves. She wiped the blood from her split lip and allowed herself a small smile. They had underestimated her again. The bounty had been placed on her head 6 months ago. $100,000 for the capture or elimination of a woman the enemy called the Ghost. Sarah had learned about it through her network of informants. Street vendors and taxi drivers who passed information like currency in this war-torn country. The amount was impressive, she had to admit. It meant they feared her, and fear was a weapon more powerful than any gun. She had been a military intelligence officer before the coup, before everything she knew crumbled into dust and betrayal. When the generals seized power, they purged anyone who might oppose them. Sarah's unit had been ambushed during a routine patrol. She watched her friends die, heard their final breaths, felt their blood on her hands as she tried desperately to save them. She alone survived, crawling through sewage pipes and hiding in burnt-out buildings until she reached the border. But Sarah didn't run. She couldn't. The faces of her fallen comrades haunted her dreams, their voices echoing in the silence. So she went back, slipping across the border like smoke, invisible and deadly. She began gathering intelligence, documenting the atrocities committed by the new regime, building a case that would bring them to justice. The generals soon realized they had a problem. General Viktor Kozlov was the first to make a mistake. He loved expensive cigars and young mistresses, and his arrogance made him predictable. Sarah had tracked him for 3 weeks, learning his patterns, his security details, his secret meetings. She knew he visited a particular villa every Tuesday night, a place where he conducted business far from prying eyes. The villa sat on a hillside overlooking the city, surrounded by high walls and armed guards. Getting inside seemed impossible, but Sarah had learned that impossible was just another word for difficult. She studied the guard rotations, the blind spots, and the camera coverage, the moments when attention wavered. She waited for the perfect storm. And it came during a diplomatic reception when half the security force was reassigned to protect other officials. Sarah entered through the service entrance. Disguised as a catering worker, her false documents were flawless, created by a forger who owed her his life. She carried a tray of champagne glasses, her head down, her movements, those of someone accustomed to being invisible. The guards barely glanced at her as she passed through the metal detector. The specialized equipment in her possession, carefully hidden in places they wouldn't think to search. Inside the villa, crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across marble floors. Politicians and military officers mingled, their laughter sharp and false. Sarah moved through the crowd like water, serving drinks, collecting empty glasses, always watching. She saw Kozlov on the terrace, his back to the party, speaking urgently into a satellite phone. This was her moment. She approached with a fresh drink, her smile practiced and empty. Kozlov waved her away without looking, too absorbed in his conversation. Sarah set the glass on the table beside him and turned to leave, but not before pressing a tiny device beneath the table's edge. It was a tracker and listening device combined. Military-grade technology she had salvaged from her old unit's equipment. For the next 2 weeks, Sarah listened to everything Kozlov said. She learned about smuggling routes, about weapons shipments, about the mass graves hidden in the forests. She learned about his offshore accounts and his plans to flee the country once he had accumulated enough wealth. Most importantly, she learned where he kept his personal files. The evidence of his crimes that he held as insurance against his fellow generals. The night she took him was cold and moonless. Kozlov left the villa alone, driving himself in an unmarked car to a meeting he didn't want recorded. Sarah had studied the route, identified the perfect location. The road passed through a tunnel, and she had disabled the lights hours before. When Kozlov's car entered the darkness, she was waiting. The collision was minor, just enough to force him to stop. She approached his window, dressed as a police officer, her face partially hidden by the cap. Kozlov lowered his window, irritation evident in his voice. He demanded to know why she had stopped him, threatened her with consequences. Sarah simply smiled and deployed the tranquilizer, watching as his eyes widened in recognition and then closed in unconsciousness. When Kozlov woke, he was in a bare room, his hands bound to a chair. Sarah sat across from him, her face uncovered now, letting him see exactly who had captured him. His face went pale as recognition dawned. The ghost was real and she had him. She didn't torture him. She didn't need to. The files she had copied from his personal safe lay spread across the table between them. Documents detailing massacres, corruption, betrayal, evidence that would send him to an international tribunal. Kozlov understood immediately what was happening. She wasn't going to kill him. She was going to make him face justice, which for a man like him was far worse than death. Sarah made the call to international authorities, providing the location and the evidence. Within hours, peacekeepers arrived, taking Kozlov into custody. The news spread like wildfire. One of the 5 ruling generals had been captured by a lone operative. The remaining 4 held an emergency meeting, their confidence shaken. They increased the bounty to $200,000. Sarah saw the announcement on the news and laughed. They still didn't understand. She wasn't doing this for money or glory. She was doing it for the people who couldn't fight back, for the families destroyed, for the future that had been stolen. And she had just gotten started. The capture of General Kozlov sent shockwaves through the regime. But it also made Sarah's mission more dangerous. The other generals would be more careful now, more paranoid. Their security would be tighter, their movements less predictable. But Sarah had spent years in military intelligence. She knew that fear made people reactive, and reactive people made mistakes. She just had to be patient enough to wait for those mistakes to happen. General Marcus Webb was different from Kozlov. Where Kozlov had been arrogant and flashy, Webb was calculated and cold. He ran the intelligence division of the regime, which meant he understood how Sarah operated. He knew she would come for him eventually, and he prepared accordingly. His security was impenetrable, his movements random, his communications encrypted. Sarah spent weeks trying to find a weakness and found nothing. She changed tactics. If she couldn't get to Webb directly, she would force him to come to her. Sarah began feeding false intelligence through channels she knew Webb monitored. She created the appearance of a resistance network, complete with safe houses, supply routes, and regular meetings. It was all fiction, but it was convincing fiction, backed by enough real activity to seem legitimate. Webb took the bait. He couldn't resist the opportunity to destroy what he believed was a major threat to the regime. He planned a massive raid, coordinating multiple units to strike simultaneously at locations across the city. Sarah watched through her network of informants as troops mobilized. As Webb personally supervised the operation from a mobile command center, he wanted to witness the destruction of the resistance himself. The command center was a modified armored vehicle, surrounded by soldiers and equipped with the latest surveillance technology. It moved through the city, directing units to their targets. Sarah tracked it carefully, noting the patterns. The brief moments when security protocols were relaxed because everyone was focused on the mission. She waited until the perfect moment, when Webb's attention was entirely on the raids that were finding nothing but empty buildings and confused. Civilians she struck during the confusion. The raids had found no resistance fighters, no weapons, nothing to justify the massive operation. Webb was furious, screaming orders into his radio, demanding explanations. His security detail was distracted by the chaos, trying to understand what had gone wrong. Sarah approached the command center from the rear. Dressed in a military uniform she had taken from a supply depot days before, she carried falsified orders, documents that appeared to come from General Webb himself. When challenged by the guard at the rear entrance, she produced the papers with calm authority, explaining that she had urgent intelligence that needed to be delivered personally. The guard hesitated, but the official seals looked authentic, and the operation was already a disaster. He let her pass. Inside the command center, Sarah found Webb surrounded by screens and radio equipment, his face red with anger. He looked up as she entered, irritation flashing across his features at the interruption. She saluted smartly and began to deliver her false report, stepping closer as she spoke. Webb leaned forward to look at the documents in her hand, and that was when she moved. The tranquilizer dart hit him in the neck before he could react. His hand went to the spot, confusion replacing anger on his face. Sarah was already moving, securing the door, neutralizing the two technicians in the vehicle before they could sound an alarm. Webb slumped in his chair, his eyes struggling to focus on her face. She removed her cap, letting him see who had captured him. Getting Webb out of the command center was the hardest part. Sarah activated the vehicle's communications jamming system, cutting off contact with the outside units. She changed into civilian clothes, positioning Webb in the passenger seat, as if he were drunk or ill. She drove the command center away from the city, heading toward the industrial district where abandoned factories provided cover. The regime discovered Webb's disappearance within an hour. They locked down the city, setting up checkpoints and conducting house-to-house searches. But Sarah had already moved Webb to a location they would never think to search. A bunker system beneath an old military base that had been decommissioned years before. The tunnels were extensive, and she had prepared them carefully, stocking supplies and creating multiple escape routes. When Webb regained consciousness, he found himself in a windowless room lit by a single bulb. Sarah sat across from him, reviewing files on a laptop. These weren't his personal files like with Kozlov. These were worse. Webb had been collecting intelligence on his fellow generals, insurance policies, in case they turned on him. He had documented their crimes in detail, including his own involvement. Sarah had found his secret server and copied everything. Webb was a pragmatist. He understood immediately that his situation was hopeless. Unlike Kozlov, who had raged and threatened, Webb simply asked what she wanted. Sarah explained that she wanted him to testify, to provide evidence against the remaining generals, to expose the full extent of the regime's atrocities. Webb considered this for a long moment, then nodded. He would cooperate, but only if she guaranteed his safety. Sarah made no such promises. She contacted international authorities again, this time with an even bigger prize. General Marcus Webb, head of intelligence, was willing to testify in exchange for protective custody. The offer was too valuable to refuse. Within days, peacekeepers extracted Webb from the bunker, taking him to a secure facility where he began providing testimony that would indict dozens of high-ranking officials. The capture of 2 generals in less than a month created panic in the regime. The remaining 3 generals, Vladimir Petrov, Chen Li, and James Morrison, held emergency meetings behind closed doors. They purged their security details, executed anyone suspected of being a spy, and went into hiding. The bounty on Sarah's head increased to $500,000. Professional assassins and mercenary groups began hunting for her. Drawn by the enormous reward, Sarah vanished from the city, letting the heat die down. She moved through the countryside, staying with families who had lost loved ones to the regime, people who sheltered her despite the danger. She used this time to plan, to study her remaining targets, to understand their fears and weaknesses. The next phase of her mission would be more difficult. The generals who remained were the most dangerous, the most careful, the most willing to do whatever it took to survive. General Vladimir Petrov controlled the Army's Special Forces units, elite soldiers trained in counterinsurgency and assassination. He was a veteran of multiple conflicts, a man who had survived attempts on his life before. His reputation was built on ruthlessness and tactical brilliance. Sarah knew that approaching him directly would be suicide. She needed to be smarter, more creative. She studied Petrov's history, looking for patterns for the human weaknesses beneath the military exterior. She discovered that he had a daughter, a young woman who had fled the country years before, disgusted by her father's actions. The daughter, Natasha, lived in exile, speaking publicly against the regime. Petrov never acknowledged her in public, but Sarah's research revealed that he maintained contact through secret channels. Sending money and messages despite the political risk, Sarah reached out to Natasha through intermediaries, explaining who she was and what she was doing. Natasha was suspicious at first, but when Sarah provided proof of her father's crimes, detailed evidence that Natasha had never seen, the young woman agreed to help. She didn't want her father dead, but she wanted him held accountable. Together, they crafted a plan that would use Petrov's love for his daughter against him. Natasha sent her father a message through their secret channel. She claimed to be in danger, that agents from the regime had found her location and were trying to silence her. She begged her father to meet her at a neutral location, a small town on the border where they could talk without being discovered. It was a risk, she wrote, but she was his daughter and she needed him. Petrov knew it could be a trap. He had spent his entire career analyzing threats and avoiding ambushes. But the message contained details only Natasha would know. Personal memories from her childhood that convinced him the communication was genuine. His intelligence network confirmed that there had been unusual activity near Natasha's known location, which supported her story. After days of consideration, he made his decision. He would meet his daughter, but he would do so with maximum security. The meeting location was a cafe in a border town, neutral territory, where neither side held absolute power. Petrov arrived with a team of 20 elite soldiers, the best operatives under his command. They secured the area hours before the scheduled meeting, checking every building, every vehicle, every person. They set up observation posts and established multiple perimeters. It was the most secure location Petrov could create on short notice. Sarah watched from a distance as the security team worked. She had expected this level of preparation. What Petrov didn't know was that she had been in the town for 3 weeks, integrating herself into the community, becoming just another face in the crowd. She had rented a small apartment above a bookstore, worked part-time at a local market, and befriended the cafe owner who would host the meeting. She was invisible, just another refugee trying to survive. Natasha arrived at the appointed time. Her nervousness genuine as she entered the cafe. She knew her father was watching, knew that any mistake could expose the plan. She sat at a table by the window, ordered coffee, and waited. 10 minutes later, Petrov entered through the back door, flanked by 2 bodyguards. His eyes scanned the room before settling on his daughter. For a moment, his hard expression softened. They embraced, and Petrov's guards gave them space while maintaining visual contact. Father and daughter sat at the table, speaking in low voices. Natasha told him about the threats she had received, showed him photographs of men watching her apartment. Petrov listened, his anger building. He promised to protect her, to use his resources to eliminate anyone who threatened his daughter. This was exactly what Sarah had predicted. While Petrov was focused on Natasha, Sarah entered the cafe from the front entrance. She was dressed as a local woman, carrying shopping bags, her appearance completely unremarkable. She ordered tea at the counter, chatting briefly with the owner about the weather. None of Petrov's security team gave her a second glance. She was just background, part of the normal flow of the cafe's business. Sarah took a seat at a table on the opposite side of the room from Petrov and Natasha. She opened a book and appeared to read while sipping her tea. In reality, she was listening to the conversation through a directional microphone hidden in her shopping bag. She waited patiently, knowing that the crucial moment would come. Natasha, following the plan, told her father that she had evidence of who was targeting her. She pulled out a tablet and showed him photographs, documents, names. Petrov leaned closer to examine the screen, his concentration absolute. This was when Sarah moved. She stood, walked toward their table as if heading to the restroom, and in passing stumbled slightly, bumping into Petrov's chair. She apologized profusely in the local language, her accent perfect. Petrov waved her away irritably, his attention returning to the tablet. Sarah continued toward the restroom, and no one noticed the tiny needle mark on Petrov's neck, where she had injected him with a slow-acting sedative. The substance was designed to take effect gradually, mimicking the symptoms of sudden illness rather than drugging. 10 minutes later, Petrov began to feel dizzy. He attributed it to stress and lack of sleep, but the symptoms worsened. He excused himself to use the restroom, and his guards helped him stand when he stumbled. Sarah, emerging from the restroom at that moment, expressed concern in the local language, suggesting they call for medical help. The cafe owner, who had been briefed on the plan, immediately offered his back office as a place for the general to rest. Petrov's guards carried him into the office, laying him on a couch. Natasha followed, playing her role perfectly, concerned and frightened. The cafe owner suggested calling an ambulance, but the guards refused, unwilling to expose their location. They radioed for their own medical team, but it would take time for them to arrive. Sarah, still playing the concerned local, offered herbal tea that she claimed would help with dizziness. The cafe owner vouched for her, and one of the guards accepted the tea, giving it to Petrov. The general drank it gratefully, not knowing it contained a second, faster-acting sedative. Within minutes, he was unconscious. The guards realized something was wrong, but by then, it was too late. Natasha had locked the office door from the inside. Sarah dropped her disguise, producing a weapon she had hidden in the office days before. The two guards in the room with her faced a choice: go for their weapons and risk a firefight that might kill Natasha and Petrov, or surrender. They chose surrender. The extraction was carefully planned. A vehicle waited in the alley behind the cafe, driven by one of Sarah's contacts. She and Natasha moved Petrov through the back exit while his security team outside remained unaware of what had happened. By the time the guards forced their way into the locked office, Sarah was already miles away. Petrov woke in another secure location, this time an abandoned monastery in the mountains. Sarah had prepared this site for months, knowing she would need somewhere remote and defensible. When Petrov's eyes opened, he saw his daughter sitting beside him, tears streaming down her face. She apologized, explained that this was the only way to stop the killing, the only way to save what remained of his soul. Petrov listened as Sarah presented him with the same choice she had given the others: face international justice, or face execution by his own colleagues, who would certainly kill him for his failure. Unlike Webb, Petrov didn't cooperate immediately. He remained silent for days, refusing food, refusing to speak. Sarah didn't push him. She let him sit with his choices, let him watch news reports of his regime collapsing, let him contemplate the legacy he would leave. It was Natasha who finally broke through. She spent hours talking to her father, reminding him of the man he used to be before power corrupted him. She told him about the families destroyed by his orders, the children orphaned, the futures stolen. She begged him to do the right thing, not for redemption, but for truth. On the fifth day, Petrov agreed to testify. The international community was stunned when General Vladimir Petrov surrendered to peacekeepers, accompanied by his daughter. The testimony he provided was devastating, detailing military operations, massacres, and the internal workings of the regime. With 3 of 5 generals now in custody, the remaining 2, Chen Li and James Morrison, knew their time was running out. They made their final stand in the capital city, barricading themselves in the presidential palace with their most loyal troops. They declared martial law, executed suspected sympathizers, and prepared for a siege. The international community surrounded the city, but hesitated to attack, knowing it would result in massive civilian casualties. It seemed the standoff would last indefinitely. Sarah studied the situation from her mountain hideout. The remaining generals had fortified their position, but they had also trapped themselves. The palace was a fortress, but fortresses could become prisons. She needed to get inside, but the security was absolute. Every entrance was guarded, every approach monitored, every person inside the palace personally vetted by Chen and Morrison. It seemed impossible, but Sarah had learned that impossible just meant no one had found the solution yet. Sarah spent 2 weeks observing the palace, studying the routines, the guard changes, the supply deliveries. The generals had stocked enough food and ammunition to withstand a months-long siege. The palace had its own water supply and power generators. They could wait out any conventional assault. But Sarah noticed something others had missed. The palace required maintenance, and even during a siege, certain systems needed regular attention. The palace's main power came from diesel, generators housed in a building adjacent to the main structure. The generators required fuel deliveries every few days, brought in by tanker trucks through a heavily guarded service entrance. The trucks were searched thoroughly, the drivers were regime loyalists, and armed soldiers accompanied every delivery. But Sarah saw an opportunity in the routine itself. She studied the fuel delivery company, learning that it was owned by a businessman with ties to the regime. The drivers were well paid and carefully selected. Sarah couldn't infiltrate the company directly, but she could create a situation that would require an emergency delivery. She began by sabotaging the palace's fuel reserves, contaminating several tanks with a substance that would cause the generators to